My first guest tonight, the leaders of the House and Senate, also happened to be the first guest I had on my first show back in March, along with the governor. At the time, despite party differences, the three of them were getting along, I'd say, swimmingly. And it appears the love fest may have continued, as last night, both the House and Senate passed a $38 billion state budget, which gave the governor much of what he was looking for. House Speaker Robert DeLeo and Senate President Stan Rosenberg both join me now. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Maybe I shouldn't have said love fest. I'll take that back. Good to see you both, and congratulations on getting it done. Starting with you, Mr. Speaker, briefly, and I do mean briefly, give me the one or two things you think in the budget that the people of Massachusetts should feel best about.
I think that our work on the MBTA, and I also feel EITC.
Earned Income Tax Credit.
Earned Income Tax Credit. And I think also the fiscal responsible budget that it was that we could all be proud of.
Earned Income Tax Credit giving tax relief to hundreds of thousands of low-income working families. How about you, Mr. President?
Ditto.
Oh, ditto.
We saw it.
Wow,
It really was the top two. And, if you look at the bottom line of the budget, we didn't spend every penny that we had available so that we'd be prepared for the unexpected. Because, as you remember, last year we ended up with a budget that had a bit of a deficit that had to be closed. $768 million, I think, had to be cut out during the fiscal year. That's very painful.
So there's a bit of a cushion.
So there's a bit of a cushion. So we got it right, and it's a solid budget.
Let's go over some of the items you just mentioned and some more. If we can start with the T. The governor spoke after your budget was delivered to him. Here's Charlie Baker yesterday.
I know everybody wants to play the who won and who lost game here. I think the fact that the legislature chose to pursue some of the reforms that the task force talked about and that we talked about with respect to the T and sort of set the table for what I believe will be a further set of initiatives to fix the T is good for the riding public.
Bob DeLeo, while he's happy, a core Democratic constituency isn't unions. This, you essentially suspended the Pacheco law, let's call it the privatization inhibiting law, for lack of a better expression, for 3 years for the team. What do you say to union people who are the backbone of the Democratic constituency, why you went with Baker's version rather than theirs?
I felt that, I shouldn't say I felt, we felt as a House that we really had to give the governor some tools to address the issues at the T. We all remember last winter in terms of what had occurred, and we all felt it was necessary that we had to be aggressive in terms of making sure that that type of disastrous winter for the users of the T would not occur again. Basically, we had given him some power relative to the control board that he had looked for,
this fiscal
and
control board,
also the suspension of the Pacheco law for some 3 years, which hopefully will give him more elasticity to run the T.
You know, when you were here in March, the three of you, we were talking about T reform prospectively. Here's what you said: we do have to do the reforms, but when that's done, it's not going to fill the gap. And anyone who studies this knows we can't do it just with reforms. Does everybody know that? I mean, let's leave Charlie Baker out of this for a second and then include him. Does everybody know that, yes, reform first, but ultimately, to really fix this mess, it's going to cost new money?
I think that was my quote, and so I still believe that, and I think a lot of people understand that. But we also said, have to do the reforms, we have to get the House in order, and most of what we've been hearing from the administration is problems with management. And so we've just given the governor the tools that he asked for in management. And by the way, there were a bunch of things passed in previous reform bills that haven't yet been implemented. I hope they'll continue to work on implementing those as well.
You nodded your head. Do you agree there's got to be new money post-reform?
Money has to be part of the equation. But I feel that before we can take the next step in terms of financing. And by the way, as the Senate President just stated, we had done some transportation bond funding, some transportation reform, in which both bills that there was some financing. But if we're going to truly, I feel, attack what's going on at the T, we really have to look in terms of whether it's management, T workers, or whoever it may be, we have to deal and make some real strong reforms, which we did in our legislation.
If the governor were sitting here, would he agree with the two of you that post-reform new money's needed?
I can't speak for him, but what I can tell you is
no, I guess I can't, because I was trying to think if I could say yes or no, and I can't. So I guess I can't speak for him.
But I'll tell you what we didn't do in the control board that the governor wanted. He wanted us to give him permission to suspend some of the funding that's already going to the T that we voted for in the legislature. And he also wanted us to sort of untie his hands around fares. And we said, no, we're not going there right now. We're not going with touching the fares right now, and we're not talking about rolling back any of the state funding. Fix the things that are broken on the management side, and then let's have the conversation about what else is needed.
I want to mention one other thing you mentioned a minute ago, both of you, this earned income tax credit. I don't know anybody who doesn't support increasing. It's a great thing for, as I say, low-income working people. Charlie Baker wanted to fund it by dumping the film tax credit. Deval Patrick, his predecessor, asked the Department of Revenue to look at it, and he said the current film tax credit costs taxpayers $118,000 for every job created. Why is that not a perfect prescription for elimination?
Because it really doesn't, that figure does not, I believe, include what actually is involved with the film tax credit.
What does that mean?
What that means is that when you go out and you take a look in terms of who are the beneficiaries of that film tax credit, many times you're going to see the ripple effect of the film tax credit is much greater than is appreciated. And I say that, for instance, I've spoken to a gentleman owns a paint shop in Chelsea, and he tells me the importance of that. Talk to some of the smaller folks who may rent furniture. I mean, there is a ripple effect in every city and town in which our surrounding community that is not considered. And I think that's important and why I've been a supporter of the film tax credit.
Let's go to the Olympics for a second. My understanding is the thing you guys passed in this budget is that no state funds can be spent on the Olympics without a vote by the legislature. Isn't that what the law was before the budget was passed yesterday?
The idea was to put on the table a very clear statement that we are concerned about the finances and that we cannot afford to do either an operating subsidy for the Olympics or close a deficit. So we wanted in advance to know what the plan is, what the costs are associated with it, and we wanted them to come to us with anything that they are requesting that hasn't already been approved. And what's been approved are some infrastructure projects.
Things.
Exactly. And so those can move forward because we're going to do them anyway. We don't want any assumptions being made that we're going to do more than what we have said we're going to do.
Why don't you just say that? Why not, instead of saying you can only spend state money if it's appropriate, why not say what I know you have said on this show and Charlie Baker said on this show, and I think you believe, no state funds, period, except for transportation infrastructure. Why don't you just say that?
We've all said that repeatedly, and we're continuing to say it. We put something on the floor to send a very clear message that the legislature has a role in this.
I think some folks felt that to make it even clearer, if you will, we wanted to make sure if there were going to be an item such that was going to benefit the Commonwealth in the long run, the infrastructure, whether it be transportation, whether it be housing, that we would have the option at that point to say, you know what, that's a benefit to the Commonwealth in the long term.
Well, let me be clear.
Not just for a quick fix for the Olympics. I think basically that's my major concern, Jim, is that at the end of the day, if they're short of funds, I don't want to see them coming to myself as the speaker and say, oh, by the way, for us to have this up and running at 2024, we're going to need about $1 billion. Well, who's that $1 billion?
But isn't that a little different from what you said to me in March? I thought you said in March, transportation infrastructure is it. You said you'd vote for the Evan Falchuk ballot question. Are you not saying there are other infrastructure costs other than transportation? You just mentioned housing that you might appropriate money for beyond that if you thought there was money well spent?
Well, if for instance, we'll take housing, for instance. This is a thought that I had. If you had housing, you talked about an Olympic village, we'll say, for the athletes. There's also been some discussion around about University of Massachusetts at Boston, needing some dormitory facilities. So if we could take care of both the village plus the dormitory.
With state money.
With state money, then, that might be an answer to that question. In the long run, may benefit the Commonwealth. But I still stand for the basic premise, no taxpayer funds.
What's your greatest disappointment? What did you not get in this budget? Because it is the process of negotiation, Stan Rosenberg.
I think my biggest disappointment was that the Pacheco law was basically exempt for 3 years for the T.
How about you? What's your grade at this point, Mr. Speaker?
I was generally, pleased with the outcome. I would have to say probably if I had to pick one item, it would have been the fact relative to the freezing of the income tax in terms of how we would have funded the earned income tax credit.
Hey, do you guys, I looked up, you've served in the legislature, what, 25 years or something? Do you like each other? Are you friends?
We're becoming friends. We barely knew each other.
Are you friendly?
We're going out to eat later if you want to
you are
join
really
us.
coming
Yeah.
You're going tonight to go to dinner?
Yeah. We didn't, the way you develop relationships is with your own regional legislative delegation and serving on committees together. We never had the pleasure of serving on a single committee together. So we're really just getting to know each other.
Great.
He's a hell of a guy.
It's working well. It's working out well.
Couple of quick things before we go here. Casinos. Have you been to Plainville, either of you yet?
Nope.
No, okay. Springfield, theoretically Everett. A lot of people think that maybe we should slow down post that, and the Gaming Commission, I know it's independent, but you have bully pulpits, should hold on southeastern Massachusetts until we see, in light of Atlantic City, light of revenues are down in Connecticut, until we see how Springfield, Everett, and Plainfield do. Do you subscribe to that notion?
I would leave that to the commission. That's precisely why the law was written the way it was written, to give that commission the authority beyond politics to decide what was right for the people of Massachusetts.
You're okay with that?
And the driving force in southeastern Mass is when the Mashpee Wampanoag get their land, because they can have a casino automatically on that land. And so that's really the driver in southeastern Mass. In the meantime, that region wants to be treated fairly in the way every other region is being treated. And so the Gaming Commission is working with them to work on a commercial license in the event that there's an opportunity to do that.
We only have a minute left. A very quick question to both of you off the two huge Supreme Court decisions last week, Affordable Care Act and same-sex marriage. There's a story in the Globe mentioning that it was odd that your predecessor, who was actively involved in the universal health care access, same-sex marriage, Sal DeMacy, who's now in prison, was not even mentioned. What was your reaction to that? What do you think about that?
When I read the article, I think to a certain extent that it was true. I mean, spot on in terms of those were. I think Speaker DeMacy was probably one of the major leaders relative to health care reform. And I can tell you in the House, obviously he was a stalwart advocate for same-sex marriage.
And speaking of same-sex marriage, before we go, you're marrying your partner. You're still not going to tell us when you're doing this? Is that where we stand?
Absolutely not telling you until we're ready.
Fair enough. Mr. Speaker,
Nice
congratulations on getting your work done.
Nice
Same to you, Mr.
Thank
President.
you.
Pleasure to see you both,
I
gentlemen.
see you.